There are few forces on our planet as powerful or as life-giving as fresh water. It sculpts landscapes. It dictates where life can flourish. It has shaped the course of human civilization. But what happens when humanity attempts to redirect this force on an unimaginable scale? This is the astonishing story of how America, driven by a vision of boundless growth, embarked on a monumental quest to transform its most arid and unforgiving deserts into thriving oases. It was an ambition of breathtaking audacity, a plan to defy nature itself. To achieve this, an almost incomprehensible amount of water had to be moved. Not just millions of gallons, but billions upon billions of tons of fresh water, captured and diverted from mighty rivers and distant mountain ranges. This liquid lifeblood was channeled across hundreds of miles of sun-scorched earth, destined for lands that had known only drought for millennia. In the early years of the 20th century, the American West was a land of stark contrasts. It was a place of immense, breathtaking beauty, but also of profound hardship. For the pioneers and settlers drawn by the promise of a new life, the primary obstacle was not distance or terrain, but the overwhelming lack of water. Mojave Desert, Sonoran Desert, Great Basin Desert. These lands were seen as wastelands, formidable barriers to manifest destiny. A young, ambitious nation refused that narrative. A powerful idea took hold in the minds of politicians, engineers, and dreamers. What if the desert wasn't permanent? The federal government, led by the new Bureau of Reclamation, was given a monumental mission to make the desert bloom. To turn the dream of a watered West into reality required an engineering effort of almost mythical proportions. The first and most critical task was to subdue the wild and unpredictable rivers, chief among them the Colorado. For centuries, its powerful spring floods had carved the Grand Canyon. To harness this power, humanity would need to build a barrier of a scale never before conceived, the Hoover Dam. Construction began in 1931 in the depths of the Great Depression. Workers were tasked with pouring millions of cubic meters of concrete. Concrete poured layer by layer, forming a colossal arch-gravity dam over 220 meters tall. The river had to be diverted through massive tunnels carved into the canyon walls. It was a project that defined a generation's belief in its own capabilities. When completed, the Hoover Dam was a modern wonder of the world. Behind its immense wall, the Colorado began to back up, slowly forming Lake Mead. This single structure turned a wild seasonal torrent into a predictable, manageable resource. It was the linchpin, the first step to control and distribute water across the American West. But holding the water back was only half the battle. The next challenge, move water across vast deserts and mountains to thirsty cities and farms. With the great waterworks in place, the transformation of the desert was not gradual, it was astonishingly abrupt. The impact was immediate and profound. Land that had been parched and barren for millennia, capable of supporting only the hardiest of life, was suddenly inundated with a steady, reliable supply of water. The most visible result was the explosion of agriculture in places that seemed utterly inhospitable to farming. California's Central Valley, Imperial Valley. The combination of year-round sunshine, fertile soil, and now abundant imported water, fields of lettuce, alfalfa, cotton, citrus groves. This new agricultural heartland began feeding not just America, but the world. Cities that were once little more than dusty towns began explosive growth. They were artificial oases, sustained entirely by water from hundreds of miles away. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. This fundamental law of physics applies just as surely to ecology. The grand success of America's water projects began to reveal a darker, more complicated side. The immense benefits came at a cost, one that was not immediately apparent. The first and most significant consequence was the profound impact on the very rivers that had been harnessed. The Colorado River, once a mighty force that carved canyons, was now a shadow of its former self. So much water was being diverted from the Colorado that for many years, it no longer reached its natural delta at the Sea of Cortez in Mexico. An entire ecosystem, a vast and vibrant wetland that had supported abundant wildlife for thousands of years, simply dried up and blew away. The river that had been the lifeblood of the entire Southwest was now completely consumed before it could complete its journey to the sea. They blocked the natural flow of sediment, which is vital for maintaining habitats downstream. Beaches began to erode, and sandbars, crucial for native fish to spawn, started to disappear. The clear, cold water released from the bottom of the dams was also a shock to a river ecosystem adapted to warm, silty flows, leading to a sharp decline in native fish populations, many of which are now endangered. Furthermore, the dream of limitless water began to run into the hard reality of a finite supply in an arid land. As the climate shifted and prolonged droughts took hold, the great reservoirs like Lake Mead and Lake Powell began to shrink dramatically, revealing a bathtub ring of bleached rock. This shrinking supply created intense social and political challenges. States, cities, and agricultural districts pitted against each other over a dwindling resource. The story of America's grand experiment in the desert did not end with the discovery of its flaws. It simply entered a new, more challenging chapter. The unintended consequences forced a period of reflection and a search for new solutions. The primary lesson learned was a humbling one. Nature's limits are real and cannot be indefinitely ignored by technology. The era of building massive new dams and canals in the West was over. The focus had to shift from increasing supply to managing demand. This has led to a quiet but critical revolution in water conservation. Cities like Las Vegas, once symbols of excess, have become world leaders in urban water efficiency. They have implemented aggressive programs to replace grass lawns with desert-friendly landscaping, recycle wastewater to a remarkable degree, and plug leaks in their aging infrastructure. Farmers are beginning to adopt more efficient irrigation techniques, such as drip irrigation, which delivers water directly to the roots of plants, minimizing loss to evaporation. There is also a growing debate about which crops are appropriate to grow in a desert, questioning the wisdom of cultivating water-intensive crops like alfalfa or cotton. The long-term results are therefore a complex mixture of enduring success and ongoing crisis. The future depends not on finding more water, but on using what we have far more wisely. And so we see that America's grand experiment in the desert brought both triumph and trouble. The audacious engineering that turned dust bowls into bread baskets and built glittering cities in the sun was a monumental achievement. It reshaped a continent, created immense wealth, and allowed millions to live in places that were once uninhabitable. It was for a time a miracle of human ingenuity, a testament to a belief that any natural barrier could be overcome with sufficient will and concrete. But this triumph cast a long shadow. The same projects that gave life to cities and farms choked the life from a great river, devastating ecosystems and trading one form of barrenness for another. The dream of a limitless resource ran headfirst into the reality of a finite world, leaving a legacy of conflict, ecological damage, and a constant underlying anxiety about the future. The great cities of the Southwest continue to exist and even grow, but their future is precarious. They remain forever tied to the snowpack in mountains hundreds of miles away and the levels of reservoirs that are chronically stressed. The agricultural productivity remains immense, but it operates under the constant threat of water cutbacks and the long-term degradation of the soil. Efforts are now being made to try and heal some of the wounds inflicted on the Colorado River. Agreements have been made to release occasional pulse flows of water from the dams, designed to mimic natural floods and bring some life back to the desiccated delta. Looking to the future, climate change models predict a hotter, drier Southwest, which will further shrink the available water supply. The era of conquest has given way to an era of stewardship, where conservation and adaptation are the only viable path forward. The future of the desert cities and farms will be written in water or its absence. What will the next chapter be?